Hi everyone, welcome to Everything Dog Training with me, John McGuigan, Glasgow dog trainer and behaviour consultant. I'm a professional dog trainer in Glasgow, Scotland, and have run my business since 2009. Let's go with that, there or thereabouts. And I do one-to-one dog training with a variety of dogs and their people on a huge range of training and behaviour problems, issues, stuff, from puppy training right through to adolescent training, separation anxiety, aggression and reactivity, and everything in between. So welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming back if you're a return listener, and if you're new, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you do come back. I've got a really interesting conversation for us this week with Iain Robertson, who's a dog trainer in Norway. Before we get to that, we are just a couple of months away. I'm going to Australia for 3 seminars in November. So first weekend in November we'll be in the Melbourne area, second weekend we're going to be in the Sydney area, and the third weekend we're going to be in the Brisbane area. So if you're interested in coming to one of those seminars and you're in Australia or not and interested in travelling, then please ping me an email, info@glasgowdogtrainer.co.uk, and I'll send you details of how to sign up for those. Any feedback that you've got on the podcast, then please do leave it. You can leave reviews on iTunes, and I think you can leave comments on Spotify for this podcast. So if you're listening on Spotify, then please do leave a positive comment or any feedback. Okay, obviously positive feedback's preferred, but I dare say that if you're inclined to leave negative comments, you'll just not listen to it again. That's certainly what I would do. Anyway, on to today's episode. So Iain has described himself as follows. So it's Iain Robertson, also known as Rob. He's originally from the UK, but now living south of Oslo in Norway. He has a background in the telecoms industry, where he has worked for many different companies, including the Royal Navy, British Telecom, Marconi and Telenor, and held different positions. 3.5 years ago he started working for himself as a private consultant, offering management and project services. At the same time, he started his education as a dog trainer instructor with Tess Erngren, my good friend. As my good friend, and now Rob's good friend as well, but Tess is an awesome human being, at the GoodDog Academy in Oslo, after finding that he needed more insight and help with his dog Baloo, a field line Labrador Retriever. So the field line, for those that are listening in the US, apparently you call them something different. There's the American line and the British line, or the English line. So there's a British Labrador and an English Labrador. British Labrador and American Labrador. So the field line is the narrower type, the working line looking one, rather than the big chunky one. And I'm never sure which one is which for any Americans. I think in Canada you do the same, you call them the same. So fast forward to today, he has recently qualified as a behaviour consultant, where he helps people on a one-to-one basis with their dogs. At the same time, he runs a weekly open training where he can manage each session depending on the needs of the dog and people attending. Recently, on the back of a start-up incubator program with a company called Antler this spring in Oslo, he's taken his passion for dogs to a whole new level. They're going to build the world's largest database of dog training and behaviour, and they want to improve information about dogs for everyone and show that positive reinforcement training does work. If this is something that you think is interesting and you'd like to help, please visit www.canisdata.com, and Canis is CANISDATA, so Canis Data or Canis Data, depending where you are in the world, canisdata.com, or alternatively you can email them at info@canisdata.com. So how are they going to do this? They're going to do this by providing software to the trainer to set up their classes and manage one-to-one training. The dog owner or guardian uses the app or the software to track their training progress. They're in the early stages of testing and always on the lookout for volunteers to help. So to help test, so owners and trainers are both welcome. So if you're interested in that, then please, I'm going to link this in the show notes. Please do have a look at that. This has got the potential to be really revolutionary in the way that we interact with our dogs. Data works, okay, and the plural of anecdotes is not data. I always like that. Okay, this is a proper way to collect data and analyse it, and then apply that analysis. Okay, the grand vision is to track the dog from birth to death and cover breeders, fear periods, breed-specific knowledge, training and behaviour, nutrition, health and in the environment. But this is going to take a long time to achieve. This is why they're concentrating on building where we see the greatest need. So come and join our community, and all the best from Rob. So that's what he signed off with. So please do contribute to this or have a look at that, and I'll do my best to promote that as well, because it's an awesome project. Super interesting conversation. What I'd done at the start when I started the podcast was I'd kind of aimed it at trainers, and then it's moved slightly, and I'm hoping that it's now for kind of dog geeks or people that are interested in helping their dog to the best of their knowledge. So there's a balance here between getting super geeky about things, which is left to my own devices. That's where I would go, but that can become so niche that I lose a lot of the audience. So we've gone backwards, and I had a discussion with Rob before this to make sure that we tried not to have that happening. I don't know if we managed or not. Hopefully we did. So there's a couple of bits that we could have get really, really into a lot of the detail into in this, but I tried to keep it as general as possible whilst getting the information out of him that we needed for this. So hope you enjoy this. Feedback as usual through my email, or you can get me through my socials. That's at glasgowdogtrainer.co.uk. No, it's not. It's at Glasgow Dog Trainer on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. Okay, so let's get into it. A quick edit on that, guys. You'll hear me in this podcast talking to Rob about meta-analysis of data that was done by University of North Texas. So that's as best as I know to my knowledge. However, I think I mentioned it was 50,000 studies that they analysed. Okay, so they took the data from 50,000 studies. I actually think it's been over 50 years rather than 50,000. So I knew it was 50 something, but I've just been thinking about that, and it's just so that I'm not putting out false information. And that information's to the best of my ability. All right, the best of my knowledge. Yeah, just to correct that. Let's get on with it. So massive thanks for joining us this morning. This afternoon where you are here?
Just.
Okay, right. So thanks for coming and taking time out of your schedule to speak to us. So we've got a number of things to talk about. So let's hear a little bit about how did you get into dog training yourself?
Very short, John. The reason I got into dog training about 5.5 years ago, after many, say, years of campaign, I managed to get myself a dog. I grew up with dogs, so I've always missed and been with dogs. And so after much discussion with my wife, she said, okay, we can get a dog, but I'm going to pick which kind of dog we get. And I was like, I don't care, let's just get a dog. So she did some discussion with some of her colleagues, and she came back and said, I think we should get a Labrador Retriever. And I said, okay, maybe a little bit boring, but okay, we'll go with that. So at the time, it was quite difficult to get hold of a dog. I did some research. I thought I knew what I was doing, and I found this Labrador Retriever. We went to visit it. I remember really clearly, and it had like a little ball, and I rolled the ball for it. I went and got the ball at 8 weeks old and brought it back to me, and I thought, that'll do. We'll take him. So get the dog home, start doing all the things. I've read all the books. I've done everything I can possibly do to prepare to get this dog. And I know I've had dogs before. I'm going to start training this dog. So I jumped straight into that, take him into puppy class, the first puppy class. And I have a very clear memory of thinking, you are excellent. All the other dogs around you are barking like crazy. You are doing just as you're told and you're working. This is easy.
Your dog?
This is my dog.
Yeah.
But when I'm then out on the street, I noticed something very different.
Okay.
Two very different dogs. Young dog course, something similar. And I'm thinking, okay, why is this? So when he's working, and now I have a better understanding of what's going on. But then I'm like, well, hang on. He goes to puppy school. He goes to young dog course. Everything's fine. But when we're out and about and everything else seems to be slightly more challenging. Okay, he needs some more activation. So I did some search courses with him. I did lots of different things, tried to do everything I could as a good dog owner. And basically, I didn't find anything that was giving me the answers that I was looking for.
Okay.
So I did some online stuff with Ian Dunbar, which I found was fascinating. So my training, he was good, he was obedient, but he was certainly reactive towards other dogs on the street. And I'm thinking and especially people coming to the house. So you have an over kind of socially active Labrador Retriever. So I was looking, right, okay, maybe I need to go deeper into this. And the best way is to go and become a dog trainer myself.
Okay.
So I started looking around and then, well, hang on, well, there's no certification which bonds everything together. So my Norwegian's pretty good, but I was thinking maybe I should do this in English rather than going to the Norwegian Kennel Club.
And just saying, just now, because I know you get that your Englander accent going on there. You live just outside Oslo,
Yeah, correct.
right? Okay.
So
yeah, okay. And how long have you been? How long have you been in Norway?
18 years now.
So this is all of this experience has been done in Norway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's just to clarify that in case people are like that. Why would you be doing it in Norwegian?
No, sorry, yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
living in Norway. And I ended up being in contact with a lady called Tess Erngren, who runs a school called GoodDog.
Yeah.
We had several emails, and didn't really want to do clicker training. For me, that's just like another complication in the
Okay.
mix. And she said, no, it's not clicker training now. She said, why don't you just come along for the first course? And if you don't like it, then fine.
Yeah.
Then we headed into the pandemic, and the first meeting was online. And I remember Tess's words in her introduction, and it was more to the effect of, if I can get a bear to give me his claw so I can cut his
Yeah.
paws, I don't expect you to pin your dog down to clip its nails.
Yeah.
Fair enough, Tess. I'm listening. And that was it. So that's how I got into the more modern style of dog training with the Good Dog School. And that was 3.5 years ago. And since then, I completed that instructor's course, and a lot of the stuff I've done in my career actually then came through. I've stood in front and spoken to many people, had management positions. So instructing for me is not a problem, if that makes sense. So
I'm
then
going to ask you some more questions about that in a second. Yeah.
yeah. So learning the theory and understanding the things I didn't know. And that course with Tess was a year, 12 weekends, lots of study, lots of reading, lots of everything. And that went very well. So then I started my own small dog school where I live in a place called Nesodden, just outside of Oslo. And I was working there. And then recently I took the behaviour specialist course. So I've got even further deeper into why and how.
Still with
And then
Tess. With Tess.
with Tess again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, in week 2 or the second session, I actually said to Tess, okay, I'm on board, you've got me. But I have one question. Can you prove to me that your system of dog training works? And she said, well, I can tell you from experience, Rob, and I've been doing this for 25 years or however long this works. I said, no, Tess, if I'm going to explain to somebody who's going to come to my class, how can I explain to them and prove to them this is going to work?
Yeah.
I've since found out that she said, Rob, you are the first person in 25 years to ask me that question.
That's good. And that's what
Yeah.
we're talking about that just before we started recording about the wealth of experience that we've all got.
Yeah.
So and just for people that are listening, Tess and I are really good friends. All right. So it's just how we get connected today, so and Tess is this a truly awesome human being. So so despite all of that, or as well as all of that knowledge and experience that she's had, there's still new questions come up because we need to she's never met you before.
No, correct.
And I don't mean like she's never met you before, never met anybody like you. You your own unique experience that you're bringing to the table, and that's the question that you brought.
Yeah.
And we've all got these questions, eh?
Absolutely. And I think that helps. And one thing that then really struck me, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is how much information you need to have on board to actually manage a dog in a sustainable way.
Yeah. So we'll stick a pin in that for a second. Let's go back to what's your background. So I'm not going to ask. Do you know? Have you ever been told you look like the guy from Breaking Bad, the cop, Uncle Hank?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Right. So do you know that actor?
I better check him out. I've been told I look like Danny Murphy before. The footballer. That's about it.
Well, if you're talking football, you're talking to the wrong person. So, no, he was the Walter White's brother-in-law in Breaking Bad.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's just because of the angle, because you're looking at the top of the screen, eh?
Yes, maybe.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay, but the resemblance is pretty striking. Anyway, right. So what's your background? So how did you come to be in Oslo, and then what jobs did you do before?
Okay, so dialing back, my first job out of school was actually in the Royal Navy, and I was a communications operative on submarines. So I
Okay,
actually had a number of years up in the north of Glasgow, about 3 years based up at Faslane.
when
When I left the Navy, then I continued my path in communications, climbing mobile phone masts and installing them for a few years, and very quickly became a mid-level manager simply because I could turn up on time, speak to people. I think that was it, and cared about what was going on around me. So I've been working in telecoms for about 30 years. I've worked for British Telecom, I've worked for Marconi. And then when I moved to Oslo, I started working for a cable television company doing technical project management again. Um, Also for the Norwegian British Telecom equivalent, it's called Telenor. I had some interesting senior positions there. And recently, about 3.5 years ago, I've been working for myself as a private consultant.
okay.
Uh, so that's what I do now. I go in and help people fix projects, typically on a technical nature, but it's also on a people-to-people side of things, and actually just putting some common sense behind what we're trying to deliver.
And those skills there. So I take it there's been a big supervisory role there in what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, you come in, you assess the situation. It can be on a contractual basis or even on a personal basis. Two people don't see eye to eye. And often it's a case of, look, we're all trying to do the same thing. Let's move in this direction. And I guess a lot of that comes away from it doesn't matter what your personal opinions are. What are the facts on the
Yeah.
table here? What are we trying to do? Where's the real problem? And yeah.
So what skills from your background did you bring and you're running dog training classes? How often do you do them a week?
So I do that once a week at the moment. I have an open training. So people come and dependent on the dogs that turn up, I will change the syllabus dependent on what their needs are.
That there in and of itself there's a lot of skill involved in that, because you've got to be fluid and adaptable. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And what skills did you bring into your dog training then from your previous life?
I would say, yeah, listening to what people's problems are, trying to understand what the actual problem is. And people will often come with a lot of frustration. The dog won't stop jumping. The dog won't do that. And then you need to try and pick that back without, and then you need to then translate that from your technical information you have to what's going on. What is the behavior? What's the actual function of the behavior, and try and bring that back. So you're working in your own head, and then you need to retranslate that in a simple fashion. So
Yeah.
one of the things I used to do, talking about conflicts, you go into a boardroom and you have very senior managers who say, "What's going wrong? What's going wrong?" And you can't go in there on a technical level. You
Yeah.
need to deconstruct and then reconstruct so they'll understand. And so I do a lot of that with my clients. This is happening on a basic level because of this, and this is what we need to try and fix.
Yeah. Okay. And you'd said when we've been chatting before we started recording, you'd said that you feel there's a lot of poor information about out there. Is that one of the things do you think that adds to the difficulty that people have in understanding their dogs?
Yeah, my personal opinion, when we look at social media and the formats that we use in social media, it can either be, look, it took me 10 minutes to get this dog to be crazy reactive to now be still and calm, where people then don't realize that dog is just completely scared and they've used some type of adversive techniques and it's going to work there and then. This is just my own personal opinions. Or it can be people are too long-winded with the information and dig too deep, so
Yeah.
people click off
Yeah.
and they don't find what's suiting them. And that's often a problem. So there's so much information and people are trying to do a really good job, and people aren't very well informed with the different styles of training.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you start getting more informed of the different styles of training, then you realize there's a whole political backlash in the background, which doesn't help.
Yeah, yeah. So this will be the $1 million question. What do you think's the answer to that?
Well, I have my personal opinion. The answer to that is we need to go to a much more evidence-based system. I want to be able to create, and there's something that I'm working on at this moment in time, to create a way of capturing data points which are reliable that people can then go and make their own mind up.
Right, I'm going to come back to that. Right, expand on that a little bit for me.
Okay. I actually put this at the last of my subjects rather than jumping straight in. But as we're here, let's go. So I'm currently running a project called Canis Data. Now, Canis Data aims to revolutionize the way that we track information about our dogs and dog training and dog behavior. And our goal is to create the world's largest database of dog training and behavior.
Okay.
The big hairy goal is to actually track the dog from birth to death.
Yeah.
If you look at the moment and look at all the different scientific studies which are done on is aversive training versus positive training and which is the best, they either use too few dogs and the window is too short. Imagine you have a wealth of information from when the dog is born and you have breeders on board, and then you're following the dog through the different stages of their growth.
Yeah.
And then you are tracking how does a dog, and I'm talking, but also very important, I'm talking very specifically here to do with pet dogs. Yes, you can do this through professional service dog types as well, but they have more of a structure around that. And the goal that I'm looking here is to help pet owner dogs.
So how do you then, so just looking at that there, so you've got collecting these data points, which we'll expand on in a bit. How do you account for so there's so many variables there, so even if you look at a litter of Labradors and there's 8 in the litter, all right?
Yeah.
And then, in fact, I'll use an example from my own experience. I worked with a client a few years ago, and it was the dog she had. He was a big dog. I mean, like bigger than a German Shepherd. Big dog, and he had 4 working breeds in him. And I won't, because it was a fairly unique combination. And I won't mention just to be discreet with people. Now, the dogs then, the male dogs then hit adolescence, and the people they had a Facebook or a WhatsApp group, everybody that bought a puppy, but there was so many variables in the lifestyles of the people that bought the dogs, how the dogs were reared, the training methods that they were used on these dogs, that how do we then start? So just there, that then massively skews our data anyway, or starts to, because you can't compare those 2 dogs because there's too many. They've just done, one's gone left and one's gone right in their life. So how do you start accounting for that?
Well, the goal is if you can capture, imagine if those 2 dogs or that whole litter had data following it through its life, you would then have better data points to understand what has actually happened. So each of those dogs, so you have the genetic disposition, as you've said. If there's a whole mix in there, you can't tell which one's going to go left or right. Then you have its learning history, of course, but what you can then do is control the situation you put that dog in. So if I know, for example, that I have a Labrador Retriever, incidentally, he's 5.5 and he's socially kind of crazy bananas. So I know when I have people coming to the house, how I manage him now, the situation that I put him in order for him to carry out the act or the action or the behavior that I want him to do. So if it was all Labradors, I mean, the whole idea of this is to have more data points at a kind of a higher level. So you can say, and it's also the data points that you capture. So how would that work? I'm really interested at the moment. We're starting our first trial just 2 weeks ago in puppy courses. When we did the research of, is this worth it? Will anybody do it? All of
Yeah.
the trainers we spoke to, and that is the trainers in Norway, in the UK, and also in the US, they say the biggest challenge we have is owner compliance,
Yeah.
people actually doing the training. So as I say to people when they come to training, okay, if you don't do the training, I can guarantee you that dog won't get better or the
Yeah.
behavior won't improve. But if you do the training, you are increasing your chances.
Yeah.
And it's not an absolute thing here. And that's actually one thing I'm really interested to find out, that if you do train your dog on a really systematic way for the first 2 years of its life and understand the underlying drivers to get the correct behavior, are we on the right track? Or
Yeah.
are we just talking nonsense because we feel that that's what we're doing?
Right. So oh God, I could talk about this for hours. Right. So so many questions, but so when you said there, right, and this is it brought me nicely to my next question. So you said there, we feel we're doing the right thing. Okay. So you're saying there that the purpose of this study or data collection is so that you've got data points. Okay. Now, we see this across the board in our politics just now. You know that I'm going to use. I was in the States a few months ago, or sorry, last month, and I drove down the. I was driving down, and there was a sign outside somebody's house because of the upcoming election. And I'm paraphrasing here, but it says nobody cares about your feelings, right? Okay, now, so just to use that as an example, and I try not to get political and stuff like that, but we've got we look at the election in the US. There's no data to suggest that there was even any election fraud that was meaningful. So there was no evidence for that. But there's a significant portion of the population that still feel that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we, when people say, I feel that this isn't working, and you're like that, well, but it is working because we can see that it's working. As a scientific collection of data, it's fine, but we also have to deal with the owner or the guardian of the 14-week-old Rottweiler or German Shepherd or Malinois that's jumping up and biting them, and it's not just these dogs that do it, the puppy that won't leave them be. So how do you, and I know I'm going backwards and forwards between your data collection head and your dog trainer dealing with clients head, but how do we resolve that?
First of all, I would say seeing is believing. So you can actually show when you first came here, it took your dog this long to sit down and be calm. So, and one of the sets of training that we do, and I'm a kind of was new to me when I kind of started working with Tess, is you need to get the dog to be in a calm state so its cognitive abilities can actually work.
Yeah.
So regardless whether it's on a mat, whether you're sat on a bench, or the dog is simply stood, if you can show, okay, that's when your dog is calm, and every week you come here, okay, that's taking your dog 5 minutes to calm down the first week.
Yeah.
Now it's taking a minute for your dog to calm down. That for me is a data point in itself. So you can kind of point that out. So that's one example. When you start then going into the activities, and at the moment in the trial we're simply saying, have you done the training? Yes or no? The 5 kind of repetitions, yes or no, yes or no. Then, of course, if you go in, for example, to recall, then we could go into distance, distraction, and duration. Then you can really kind of get nerdy about this stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm also very aware at the base point, I know if I can get you to do more training, your dog will have better behavior, period. So it's kind of starting, I'm kind of trying to want to get people hooked a little bit on this.
Yeah.
And if people do train their dogs properly for the first 2 years, you will solve a lot of behavior challenges, I believe.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. So how do we then, I've got my own thoughts on this. How do we then resort or reconcile when the dogs that are dogs that don't go through this process, don't go through kind of real active training, and they turn out okay anyway? How do we explain that?
Well, the actual scientific explanation for that is that their genetic disposition, their learning history, and the situation they've been in, they have managed to work themselves around, and maybe the behaviors the barking at the door, the owner's gone, well, actually, I want my dog to bark at the door. Actually, I don't mind him sat next to me at the dinner table and eating from my plate. Oh, he's okay to come and sleep in my bed. It's not a black and white thing. Every behavior has a function, and what's okay for me is not necessarily okay for somebody else. So one of the things I always ask my clients, what is your expectation? What is it you're trying to achieve? It's not for me to tell you whether your dog can jump up and speak to people or not. Most people want their dog to behave in a socially appropriate manner, not barking, not lunging, not being scary. So if those dogs have done this, and you can think of farm dogs, a collie dog who's just never had any training, but just followed its mum around. Well, it has had training from its mum.
Yeah.
So I think it's the dogs that are typically, my personal opinion, they've gone to puppy course because that's when people really put the effort in. And then about 50% drop off. And we've done the research on this, 50% drop off into young dog course. And then you maybe have 10% who are doing sports and they're your kind of doggy nerds.
Yeah.
They're also interesting, by the way, because then that's different. Then you're into a performance area rather than just a behavior area.
Yeah.
It's the other dogs that are left behind that somebody decides, hang on, he's now 2 years and I'm considering to give this dog up because I can't manage them anymore. Or I can't go away for work because nobody in my family can manage my dog apart from me, for example.
Why do you think there is that drop off from puppy to young dog and then after young dog class, adolescent or class?
It can be a combination. I think people have very busy lives. So they go, right, I've got my puppy, I'm going to take it to puppy course. And they don't realize and they get told on the puppy course. This is also another thing. You get told on how your puppy develops over time, but probably don't repeat it. They go to puppy course and they get that in the first theory class, and the information's kind of rammed down their throat, and then they never look at it again. And they don't actually realize that they need to train the dog for a longer period because the puppy is going to go through those different stages of growth. So then they think, well, God, I don't have to listen to that instructor anymore, so I'm not going back there. Or I had a bit of a terrible time there. I took my dog and the wind was coming and the rain's coming in my face. I could only hear a little bit. My dog's barking at me. They didn't have a particularly good time of it.
Yeah.
They didn't have the support. Or if when they did ask the question of the instructor's just simply following through their set regime rather than actually catering for each of the individual needs of the dogs.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff going on there as well. No, it's so cool. It's cool. So that it's kind of akin to there's a few things there, right? We take our dog to 6 weeks or 8 weeks of puppy class. So they start at, depending on your setup, between 8 and 12 weeks old. Okay. And we take the puppy class for set 8 weeks. And then the next stage from that would be the adolescent dog class, okay, or the young dog class. Now, when people stop taking them because they think the dog is in quotes trained, that's kind of akin to taking a child up to maybe primary 3, so that's like 10 years old, not 8 years old, and then just going, cool, that's them, they're finished now, and I think I think a lot of it happens because our dogs, they look physically mature really quickly, so if you look at an 8-month or a 10-month-old Labrador, that dog looks like an adult dog. It doesn't look like a 4-year-old Labrador because a 4-year-old Labrador, especially with the boys, they're all thicker and muscle and stuff like that. Yeah. But they look like an adult dog, whereas a child at 8 years old doesn't look like an adult human. So I think there's this, we've done training, it's like a check in the box, we've done something, Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I learned when I was in the military, actually, that when you give a lecture, 14% is the highest level of information you'll take in that learning session.
Yeah.
In ideal conditions, sat with full view of the board, full articulation. Now you put yourself in the middle of a field with your dog barking at you, jumping, you feeling embarrassed, and the person just running through ticking those boxes off.
Yeah.
You can be as low as 2 to 3%. You haven't got all of the exercises. You're not doing your homework between the runs. And that's one thing that we're looking, can we improve the efficiency of in between classes? at the moment. That's one of the things that we're doing. And in the early sets of, not only are we capturing that data, we're helping the instructor to be more mobile, more fluid in their training.
Yeah.
And we're hopefully holding the learners to account of doing that homework in between, because you can get it on your phone. You can say, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Yes, I've done it, holding you accountable with some positive reinforcement, etc., even for the learners. I mean, I often say to people, 80% of dog training is the human to human relationship. Because you've set, I mean, you know this, but when people go, what, really? Yeah, I'm not here to train your dog. I'm here to train you.
Yeah. I always say to people, and I make a joke about it, I say, I already know how to do this.
Yeah.
You know, right. You don't, which is why you're here. And you know, that sounds arrogant, you know,
Yes.
but I know how to do this. You know, I can train your dog fine, you know. You know, so how would we improve? So one of the things I'll say to people is I say to them, you're not going to spend any more time with your dog than you do already. We're just going to change some of how you're spending your time. So that would be one idea to plan to increase cooperation with people, that the people, you know, cooperate with the training program more. What other things do you suggest?
So there's one thing, I'm helping a lady at the moment. She has a cross Great Dane Mastiff and Cane Corsa, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thankfully, it's a female dog, but it's still big. And I'm not joking, John, when this dog jumps, all paws off the ground to my head.
The Great Dane, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So this thing's hopping around. So now I'm trialing the software that we've built with her to see if I can get her to train every single day. And I said, you're not allowed to walk your dog anymore. I said, I want you to go off and sit on the bench, and you're going to do calm training. You're going to do contact training. You're going to do some changing of directions on the lead and play. Those 4 things, give them very clear, precise tasks to do that they must do on a daily basis. And then I go around and meet her once a week where she is and see if there's any improvement in that regard. So she's no longer walking her dog twice a day. So now she can use that time more effective. And she was first concerned, but then she's not going to be tired. And I said, let's see. Because you have to remember, her sat doing nothing is doing something for her.
Yeah, because she's concentrating.
Having that control. And then once you get the human to continue and really understand what those exercises are, really get the body mechanics working, then you can make it more complex with the, you know, the back training or the behavior adjustment training, which comes after. You can't jump straight into that. And of course, I don't call it behavior adjustment training, but that's effectively what we need to do in the next stages. So it's swapping the walk for the training. You're not using any more time.
Yeah, I'll just for our listeners, I'm going to give just a little bit of background on that. So BAT, that behaviour adjustment training, it's a system that Grisha Stewart developed maybe 10 or so years ago, 12 years ago. So you can look that up, BAT. Now, when you're saying there about, so I know, well, I said, I think when you hear something, I listened to something today. Did they have LBC on the radio when you were still in England?
I think they did, yeah.
Right, okay, so probably just starting then, or it was called something else. I think it was London Broadcasting Company before. It's now Leading Britain's Conversation. I don't know why I listened to this. It's a talk radio. It's phone on various political stuff, and just feel my blood pressure rising. There's somebody on this morning. I shouted at the radio and turned it off because it was a kind of tabloid headline question that they had asked. Of course, that's going to provoke a response, right? So the point of that there, when you're saying you'd said to the woman of this big dog not to walk her dog, there'll be people sitting here listening to this just now going, that's a lot of rubbish. How can you not walk your dog? Culturally, we've got this thing that we need to take the dog out for a walk. But what you're suggesting is we're still taking the dog outside. We're still exercising that dog through play. We're doing training outdoors in real environments. But this notion of going from A to B or round the block or driving to a park and following a route and bringing a dog home, that changes. So, but that's a big cultural shift in a lot of people, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think people feel, as you say, they need to walk the dog. I mean, literally, that's what we, it's
Yeah,
if
walking the
you say
dog.
dog, what's your very next word? Is going to
Yeah,
be walk,
yeah.
right? Or sit. It's going to, one of these things
Yeah.
are going to be attached very clearly to it. But interestingly, after a couple of days, then I said, how's it going with the dog? And that's also something you don't get, after your puppy courses, and you don't get after your young dog courses, is okay, now we're doing one-to-one training, but because she's helping with the app, she's getting it for next to nothing effectively, right? But then I'm checking in and she's like, oh, she's pooped. The dog is tired.
Yeah.
And then she realized, so how can you convince people without data it's working? Well, they see for themselves.
Yeah.
My dog is tired, even though I've sat on a bench and only been there for 20 minutes or half an hour, however long it may be. So
And
seeing is believing.
she's tired because she's having to emotionally regulate. She's getting stimulated by the change in environment, you
Yeah.
know. And that would be akin to, I remember being in Times Square in New York, 2005. I visited and I stayed over the weekend in New York, just off Times Square. And and I've mentioned this before. I'm introverted. I like people, but I don't like noisy, busy places. Like going to the place, but see 10 minutes later, I'm like, nah, I'm done. And then I would take myself off. But I remember there was a cop standing on a foot post in the middle of Times Square on a Saturday night with tens of thousands of people around him. Now, if that had been my job when I was in the police, I would have been able to get there. It would probably taken 6 months of me being exhausted coming back in from work, though, until I managed to filter all that out and build new neural connections.
Yeah.
So that, and with a young dog that you're describing there, that's what, it's not to that nth degree that I just explained, but it's the same thing as that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and that is going well. And then by simply having, I mean, she's using it's not an app, it's built online, but you get access from your telephone. I set
Okay.
the course up as the instructor and I give very clear instructions on that day. She has to just simply sign that off. And then when people get into that, then they start to do it. So it's only the first, few times that becomes a challenge. And that's only the behavior side of it. Of course, normally if you were to do a full behavior consultation, you would look at the nutrition and the setup and all of the different things we don't have to go into now. But yeah, that's where we are at this moment in time. Yeah.
Okay. So you'd said, how do you, we've got a few questions or a few things to expand on. How do you provide easy to access information to people? We've already explained it a little bit, just breaking it down into those steps. What other things can we do in order to clarify the information that we give to people?
I believe people want to see information in written form, in very clear, not too long-winded, but very clear kind of bullet points. I think you should verbally go over and explain what you're trying to do. Get them to redo it so they are practicing themselves when you're there, and then you can give them the little pat on the shoulder. Yes, that was really good. You can also send them different reference videos of stuff that you've looked at. I was looking at, I think Amelia, the dog trainer who's in the UK, the young girl there, and she was doing some back training today or some behavior adjustment training today. And that's the kind of thing I can show my client and say, look, this is the progression you're on.
Yeah.
Because getting information from different medium and different sources can sometimes help that message drop.
Yeah.
But ultimately, trusting the process and finding that support. And I think with this system now, I could probably train more dogs one-to-one than I would normally traditionally, because I can set them up, I can adjust them, I can make sure I know what they're doing, and that person feels like I'm just 100% there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's kind of similar to what I'm trying to do with the guests on this podcast. Is I'm going to try with positive training, yourself, that it's heavily skewed towards women, so I mean, I think when I started, over 15 years ago, going to conferences and seminars and stuff like this, I might have been the only guy in the room, whereas now there'll be two or three, right? But I think it went from well over 95%, and I don't know what I don't know what they are now, but I think it's probably nearer, maybe 80. You know. Now, whereas if you're looking at an aversive training, it's heavily it's the other way, and there's we could chat about that another time. The reasons for that. One of the things that I'm aiming to do with this podcast is trying to get the same over time, the same amount of male and female guests on, because if we are trying to, and again for the same cultural reasons, if we are trying to reach more men, unfortunately, a lot of time the male voice is heard louder towards men, and that's a generalization, but you get the point. So it's adjusting how you're presenting the information. So two women could have the same conversation and men wouldn't listen to it.
Yeah.
You know, but we might put women off because it's two white guys from a first world country talking, a developed country talking it. So you know what I mean? We've got all these things going on, so and what you'd said there, so you've got I'm going to talk about the bullet. I want to ask you about the bullet points in a second. So we've got the bullet points, writing down in a kind of PDF form or a written handout, explaining to them. So you've got written and then auditory, and then you're showing them video. So you've got a visual, because we've got lots of different types of learning modalities. Some people learn by watching, some people learn by doing, sort of more kinesthetic. Other people need to hear the information. So that's kind of what you're doing there, eh?
Yeah, and just to clarify, the bullet points, I've got rid of PDFs or anything else. So we open up the training, and if you need a reference in the application, you can see that bullet point, what they should be doing. Okay. So we can also add videos and we can do different stuff in there, but for now it's just written. So that's a quick reference to, okay, I'm supposed to be sitting on the bench. What's my instructions from Iain? Oh, okay, it's just that. So again, easy access to information that will be regurgitated. And if you read something 10 times, you will hopefully keep it in your system. Whereas if you've got that PDF, which is in an email somewhere, and you go to do your so it has to be accessible and it has to be workable.
Yeah. They had just a funny story on that. I was telling somebody about this recently. Did you ever have a BlackBerry?
No, I did not, but I know plenty of people that did.
Yeah, right.
I wasn't a drug dealer.
Right. So when I was the last 6 years when I was in the police, I was in a serious and organised crime and counter-terrorist unit, right? And we did surveillance. So that's all we did. We would go out and surveil these subjects. And we had a BlackBerry which had the information on it, so it would have your intelligence package. And now there was also a card reader. So the card reader, the BlackBerry wouldn't open without the card reader, but you had to put in the code so that the BlackBerry the code for that card reader, you had to put that in, and then there was a password to get into the BlackBerry itself. Okay, and then you would go into the BlackBerry and it would all be a file within a file within a file, and they never worked, right? They were horrible, because we were always getting ourselves locked out of them, which meant we never knew what password, and then we had to write the passwords down, because you weren't issued with your BlackBerry, it was issued to the team. There was six or eight of them for the team, so you'd have a different BlackBerry every day, right? So that whole system made it so difficult for us to look at a photograph of somebody in the street and go, that's him. It was just a nightmare, a total nightmare. And do you know how we ended up going around it?
I do. I think I can take a guess.
Right, so we had a WhatsApp group, and we used to print them off, the packages off, take photographs of them and share them to each other. How is that secure? But it was the only way we could do our job. It was truly horrendous. Now, it has changed. I've been away from the police for 9.5 years now. It has changed since then. It is better than it was. It was just one of the many things that makes it difficult for us to access information that we need at the time, eh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, now you'd said at the start of the hour about you would take your dog to puppy classes. This is when you go back at the beginning of your journey.
Yeah.
Take your dog to puppy classes. The dog would do well in class, and as soon as you get outside, I always think the dog's like, never heard that word before in my life.
Just to clarify, if he was under obedience, he would do well anywhere, right?
Okay, so we'll talk about the word obedience in a second.
Yeah.
All right. Tess won't like you using that word.
No, I know. That's why I'm using it.
Right, so we'll talk about that word in a second, okay? So when you're saying, and I'm going to use this term under obedience, what does that mean?
One more time, John. Was that a question?
So if the term under obedience, you said the dog would, what's your dog's name?
Baloo.
Baloo, right? So Baloo would do well, in quotes, under obedience. It's hurting my heart even to say
Yeah.
those words, right?
No, I understand.
Right. So what does that mean though, if he's under obedience?
So in that term, when I'm referring that to then, he's not under obedience
I know
anymore.
that. I know. Yeah.
Right. So in that term, I was under the best way that I knew was to get him to sit, to down, to come, to give him something. And in my head, that was a simple way of putting him into work mode.
Yeah.
And under work mode, that was his engagement with me, looking back on it, right? So if he was engaged with me, most things could work until it came to other people and other dogs. Then, of course, the reinforcers there and his highest motivation was to go to that other dog, didn't care about me, right? Like this. So contrary to now, and there's also another big difference, by the way, and I talk about finding data points which show me that this works. And in fact, I was just telling Tess just the other day, the difference now is any of my members of my family can take my dog for a walk, or our dog for a walk, and
Yeah.
he behaves the same regardless of who he is with.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas before, it was only myself that could get him, in quotes, to be obedient to what I wanted.
What changed?
The difference, understanding what positive reinforcement training was actually all about. Letting him
For your family.
first me,
Yeah, okay.
and then the family. Because in order for me to instruct, I need to understand myself. I remember about 6 months in, and I can share this story. I have a lot of places in Norway don't have a fence around their house.
Yeah.
So, we have quite an open area, and I built a place to start training. So I put a fenced area, and the kids would come home from school, and their job would be to air the dog, as we would call it, because I would be at work. So he would, during the day, we'd get out for an airing. And I happened to be working at home one day, and I thought, what's that? And I could hear my son training or playing with the dog, and all I could hear him saying was bra, bra. Now, bra means good in Norwegian, but he was doing it in such an enthusiastic way, and I'd never taught my son to tell or to do that with my dog. That's something he had picked up from me when we were out and walking, when I was very heavily instilling new behaviors, good Baloo, like this. And that ran over to the rest of my family. So
you've modeled that and they've picked that up.
So I've modeled that. I started doing it. They've picked that up. And now, now when I walk Baloo, he spends the first 20 minutes just sniffing. Yeah. I'm lucky enough to have that around. And then I have some areas where I will ask him to walk by my side because it's unsafe for him not to walk by my side. But outside of that, it's his walk. It's not my walk, right? Yeah. That's the most important thing now. So he's very rarely under obedience, so to speak. That it's now much more managing his behavior to the best of that.
And it's you've evolved into a cooperative walk, or
Absolutely
mutually beneficial.
Absolutely. So especially at the end of the walk now, he walks along, and if he's walking by my side, I can see this now, and he kind of gives me that little look and, come on then, Dad, just let me go sniff. And I let him go sniff. And so I've done all of the things using, the sniff for him is a huge reinforcer, letting him go sniff, bringing him back, let him go sniff, bringing him back. And that's been a big game changer for myself. But again, that particular dog, that's his primary reinforcer.
Yeah. That's what he likes doing most.
That's what he wants to do most when he's out and about. So let him do it.
It's funny that the word, so you have, when you worked at Faz Lane, did you hear us saying bra?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I know the
Scots word, right? So the Scots word's BRAW, bra, and it means good. Now it's really weird. Okay, this is really weird. Scots is its own dialect, okay, and we've got all these beautiful. It's a dialect of English, the same as you would get anywhere else in the UK. So Geordies have got them. You go down to Devon and Somerset, or Avon and Somerset, down to Devon and Cornwall. They've got Cornish influences. So it's still it's an English dialect, you know. And when I was growing up, we were never allowed to use Scots words because they were seen as being uncouth, right?
Okay.
Right, and that's both from school and from my parents. So saying things like "I" instead of "yes,"
Yeah.
that was no, you don't say that, son. You know, you say "yes," and you wouldn't say "bra," you would say "it's good," because it seemed to be kind of rough, and you're like, that's part of our culture, part of our heritage. But that word "bra" has come from all the Vikings, you know. Yeah, it's interesting. So the word obedience, okay, and we joked a little bit about that. How has that word changed for you? What does it mean now? Or what did it mean at the time? And do you still use that word when you're working with your clients?
No, I don't use that word with my clients at all. Obedience for me is something which belongs to the military.
Yeah.
I think it's that simple.
Yeah.
Because the problem with obedience is as soon as, whether it's a human or a dog has the choice, they will no longer be obedient.
Yeah.
That's it. So that's kind of my learning where, I grew up with 2 German Shepherds, and in my head, that's how you manage dogs, right? That's what it was. And then to understand that difference was quite now in reflections, quite life-changing, actually. Some people think it's namby-pamby. Some people think, well, they need to do this. And I think this is where a lot of the misconception comes from. But it takes a very, very long time to really understand what that's all about. And that's one of the challenges we have, I think.
What's about our need for control.
No, that word obedience, where
Yeah.
it should be, why it is, why it's not, and how you can achieve, because actually it's not the obedience you want, it's the
result.
behavior for the correct situation that you're after. It's 2 different things there.
Yeah. And that was a nice example you used there. So you looked at how long were you in the Navy for?
6 years.
Okay. So you look at, and you seem, I don't know you, that we've been only talking for an hour, right? I take it you weren't one of the head cases in the Navy.
In which regard? What's a head case?
Difficult to manage and control.
No, I was relatively compliant, I would suggest. Yeah.
Okay. So I got a friend who was in the Royal Artillery, and he's my jiu-jitsu instructor. He lives down south, and he has so he was the Royal Artillery, and he said what was interesting about, especially it's probably different in the Navy and different in the Air Force because your role's different.
Yeah.
Because you kill people from afar, whereas they're killing people up. Well, the artillery are still killing people from afar, but the infantry are killing people up close. And he said that what's interesting about it was he would see guys getting into bother, after hours or off duty or outside the barracks and pubs and stuff like that. And there was this weird conflict potentially that the military liked the fact that you were that aggressive, but wanted to control, so that they were at the same time, they were kind of like that. Yeah, you got into a fight and we don't do that, but we kind of like it at the same time.
Yeah.
So when you look at how many people did you have, the young sailors that you worked with, that when out of hours you would go down to did you go to Gaelic Head? Is that where you would go from Faslane?
We'd go to Helensburgh.
Right, okay. So you go down to Helensburgh and you get and then go into the pubs, okay?
Yeah.
And then those that would get into trouble and those that wouldn't, but those that would get into trouble, when they take them back onto base and put them on duty, they are obedient.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a whole conversation in itself, which is quite interesting, because when you actually look at, I can only speak about my background, and that is, if there's I like to always think when you're on a submarine, you're not killing anyone, you're just trying to stay alive. Because if you have a fire or anything, and when something goes wrong, there's typically so much noise around you, so much confusion, that's when your real kind of, dare I say it, classical conditioning kicks in, right? where you just do stuff, and then you'll sit back an hour later and go, God, that was dangerous. You don't even think, you just do it.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of that is you need the obedience in the military to understand this is what's expected. But you'll notice the further you get up in specializations, you look at the guys in the SAS or the SBS, and I know quite a few of these guys, they're not obedient. They can be obedient in the right social context for a second, and then they'll push them out the door because they need them to think for themselves. They need them to be motivated. And so that realization for me on the positive dog training part is really, really good. I have to say that parallel really, really helps me.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when people who don't know the difference see it on YouTube or TikTok, and they see this person with this very well-behaved dog, and he says, well, you can spend 10 minutes doing this, or you can spend a year doing the positive reinforcement stuff.
Yeah.
The truth is somewhere in between. Positive reinforcement stuff takes longer because you're trying to build a bond, you're trying to, you are shaping the animal to what the end outcome you want. And if the dog decides, well, I don't want to train today, then you have to respect the dog doesn't want to train today in a way, or change your way around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, perfect. There's so many. This is what was interesting. Behavior is just behavior. And it's behavior in people and dogs and elephants, as Tess was saying with the trimming a bear's claws, I think she told me, I can't remember if it was Tess, it was because she worked with the bears and wolves before, and I can't remember, I've got a vague memory of somebody telling me a story and they're working with a bear, and they asked the bear to do something, and the bear and it was like he tapped her, the trainer, with his fingertips, and it was like, that's what I can do.
Yeah. So
you just mind yourself.
Yeah.
I'll kill you. I'm choosing not to kill you. And the reason why, and the way that we get people to choose not to kill us is by being really cool with them all the time. Don't give anybody a reason to give you a hard time, and people won't give you a hard time. Okay. Anything, we're going to finish up. Anything else that we've not covered? I think we've covered most of the points that you wanted to cover.
Yeah, we've covered most of the points. I'm going to ask you for a favor, John.
Of course.
I want you, if possible, if you could, and I can send you a link after, to go and have a look at what we're doing at Carnage.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because the more people I can get to kind of give their professional opinion, are you just barking up the wrong tree, forgive the pun, are you kind of, can this go somewhere? Then the better, really, because I think this is one of the tools of many that we can use. You imagine, even if you can get, the studies that you've seen, you can find are minimal. There was a large one in the UK with Labrador Retrievers, a couple of thousand dogs or something. This requires 50,000 plus dogs in the end.
Yeah.
In order to help people when they're going to buy that dog, when they're going to go to training, when they're going to pick a trainer, to find out and use that large data to understand that if you decide to go for a Malinois, then you really do need to spend a lot of time. It needs a proper job, and you need to be hardcore at what you're doing.
Yeah.
As opposed to just kind of going for that fashion statement or whatever it may be. So I'm really quite passionate about that, of getting this thing off the ground. And
more help. Yeah, absolutely, no problem. What's in as well, I remember there was something, I think it was University of North Texas, they did a meta-analysis of studies about the use of aversive teaching methods in children, right? Now, the analysis was of 50,000 studies.
Wow.
Right, right. Massive, right? Now, if you look at, that's 50,000 studies with probably the minimum dozens of subjects per study, and probably more likely hundreds, right? So if you look at, and without getting a whole big thing about the vaccine and all the rest of it, the vaccine study, because we put out so many of them so quickly, that's how we got the data so quickly, whereas ordinarily it might take you, so if you're looking at a relatively newly discovered cancer or something like that, it might take you 20 years to get even a proportion of the case studies that we had in there. And I think a lot of people don't understand that about scientific data collection. It's about numbers. it's about numbers over time as well, but it's mainly about numbers. And if you look at a human study so for a medical treatment, you know, a drug or a new psychological treatment or something like this, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of subjects in that study, whereas a university study, they'll maybe have 35 or 50 dogs. That's a big study.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and that's 135 dogs. You know, that, how does that give us any? It gives us something, but not really, not much.
Absolutely. And just also for a little background on this, what we're doing now is we're actually building the community. My co-founder and the lady I'm working with, who's a full stack engineer, we looked at the feasibility of taking this to venture capital. And unfortunately, just as you were pointing out there, there's not the volumes or the financial interest to take this to venture capital. So what we need to do first is build a community, get the dogs on board. And when I actually say build the community, I mean end users. The trainers, we will provide the software and tweak that software as we go along to say, okay, you want it like this, you want that tool. What will make the end user do more training and build that up slowly but surely over time. And that's what we're doing now. So I'm actually going back to work I've just finished a startup thing for the last 6 months, which is another discussion. And now I'm going back to normal work, but this is happening on the side along with my kind of everyday dog training. So this is going to happen. So
the end user is the owner guardian with the dog.
Absolutely. Yeah. So at the moment, if you go to, and you can see it on www.carnisdata.com, it explains a little bit about what we're doing.
Yeah, cool. I'll stick that in the show notes for people. Okay.
Perfect.
So last question, what we do, I've started doing, and I got this from the Diary of a CEO podcast, Stephen Bartlett's podcast. It's a nice thing to wrap things up. So I give you a question that a previous guest has asked, okay? And then when we see how it go, okay, right? So if you could have any one fictional character as a friend, who would you have?
Fictional character as a friend. I'm gonna be proper geeky now. I'm gonna say Yoda. There we go.
Oh, nice. That's cool. Yeah. A good answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yoda.
Awesome. Cool. Wonderful. All right. So that's been it. Thank you. And thanks for your time. I said at the start before we started recording, the hour flies by, you know, so, and that's has been just over an hour. So,
yeah.
But I really appreciate it. We'll finish up here, but I'll have a chat to you in a second. Okay. So, no, thanks for donating your time, and we'll get you back on and hear about how things are going in the future. So thanks, Iain.
Perfect. Thank you very much.